Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyer Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Today's program is brought to you by me. I wrote a book called How to Stop Hating the Law, A Path to Hope for Miserable Lawyers. If you're a lawyer who absolutely hates practicing the law and can't get out of it, or if you love someone who is miserable being a lawyer, go to my website, stuartteicher.com. There's a link there to purchase my book. It's an ebook, How to Stop Hating the Law, A Path to Hope for Miserable Lawyers. Today's episode of Good Lawyers Gone Bad is about financial crimes. Financial crimes and frauds are so popular with lawyers that if I had a nickel for every case I've ever read on this topic, I'd have enough money to be able to get into the hot tub time machine, go back to the Brunswick Square Mall arcade, and play Asteroids for about a month. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say asteroids, you don't know what you missed. Matthew H. Kluger was a car salesman. Well, he started out as a car salesman, and I'll tell you, he must have been pretty good at that job because he was eventually promoted from salesman to manager of the Toyota dealership he worked at in California. Now, it would seem that Kluger was off and running into a fine career in the automotive industry based just upon the ascent that he made within that dealership. But the world of retail car sales was apparently too small for Matthew H. Kluger. Kluger, it seems, was looking for a job that had a bigger upside. After obtaining a degree in hotel administration at the Ivy League School of Cornell University, Matthew Kluger set his sights on something that he probably thought was a little bit bigger, and that was the law. He followed up on his Ivy League undergraduate degree by zoning in on one of the most prestigious law schools in the nation. Kluger attended NYU. When a student attends a school like NYU, there's more going on than just learning the law. While the student is taking classes, they are simultaneously and methodically planning their long-term careers. That's because the search for a post-graduation job starts almost immediately upon arriving on campus. The first step in a permanent job-seeking process begins in the first year of law school. As soon as the students get there, they start to hunt for summer associate positions. Now, there's a very good reason for doing that so soon, because the job one has during the summers between law school semesters, it can be vital. If you land a summer job with a good firm and you perform admirably during those summers, there's probably a really good chance that the firm's going to make you an offer for a post-graduation position. So for students at the country's elite law schools, a summer job during law school often turns into a full-time job after graduation. That's why the search for a summer associate position is an intense, highly competitive effort. You think that law students are intense and competitive when it comes to grades? You've seen nothing until you see the intense competitive effort between law students when it comes to searching for a job. Matthew Kluger was in a pretty good position. Attending a premier law school like NYU put Kluger in a special class. Not only was he a front-runner for exclusive government internships, but he was also automatically considered a serious candidate for positions in big law. Well, what is big law? We hear that term thrown around a lot, don't we? Big law refers to the law firms that make up the AmLaw 100. Each year, the American Lawyer magazine prints its list of the 100 largest law firms in the country. That list, the AmLaw 100, is basically the legal world's equivalent of the Fortune 500. Summer associateships at the AmLaw 100 firms are the most coveted law school jobs in the practice. Not only do they pay well, but if you do a decent job at the firm, you're a shoo-in for being offered a full-time position after law school. Matthew Kluger must have approached the summer associate job process with the same determination that shot him up the ranks of the car business. And that's because in 1994, Kluger landed a position with Cravath, Swaine & Moore, a firm that is perennially listed in the AmLaw rankings. The work that Kluger would be exposed to at a firm like Cravath would certainly be top-level lawyering. The big firms and big law represent big clients. We're talking about the largest corporations, the wealthiest individuals, and sometimes prominent government agencies. Large companies are attracted to the Am Law 100 firms for a couple of reasons. First, those firms attract the brightest lawyers in the world. The firms pay big money, and because of that, they attract big talent. Those firms could afford to pay those high levels because the clients they have, which are basically the world's largest companies, well, those clients pay high fees. The second reason is the legal services required by those large corporations are quite complicated, and they can only be handled by the most intelligent lawyers. So big law and big business is a match made on Wall Street. Kluger's tenure at Cravath was exactly as one would expect. For example, during the summer he worked there, Johnson & Johnson and IBM were both exploring mergers and acquisitions. Mergers and acquisitions, M&A. It's a popular term in the world of the law. What exactly is it? Well, it's a complicated business, that's what it is. Merging two businesses, acquiring other businesses. When you join together two large companies, it involves a host of very complicated legal issues, valuation issues, tax concerns, and a whole bunch of other important business issues, like how you're going to retain all your employees during the merger, how are you going to integrate corporate cultures, and there's just a ton of other stuff that has to be figured out. Not only is it a complicated business, but it's a pretty dangerous business as well, that is, financially. If the stock market doesn't approve of a company's merger or acquisition, it can respond unfavorably. And if that happens, millions of dollars in stock value could be wiped out. Of course, if the market is pleased by the deal, the exact opposite is going to happen. The value of the companies involved can rise. Depending on how much the market likes the deal, those values can rise dramatically. But what happens if a contemplated deal goes bust? Well, the market is going to react to that too. The one thing that can be guaranteed is that once the public finds out about the deals being done by large companies, the markets will move somehow. Now, wouldn't it be awesome if you could get some, advanced knowledge of those deals? Like, what if you knew when a favorable merger was going to happen before the public knew? If you did, you could go out, buy some of the company's stock before the information about the merger was made public. Then, once it's announced, the market could, maybe respond favorably. The price of the stock would go up. And then what would you do? You'd sell the stock you just bought and you'd make a mint. You'd also go to jail. That's because the whole scenario is illegal. It's what we call insider trading. Insider trading is when someone makes stock trades after getting material information about the stock that's not available to the public. It's a crime because, among other things, it can wreak havoc on the stock markets. Now, some people consider it a victimless crime. Some of those people would not include the government. The Securities and Exchange Commission considers it a very serious crime. Even though insider trading is clearly criminal, it's probably a bit more common than one would expect. And that's because the upside is just so big. The amount of profits one can make in insider trading can be astronomical. But you got to have a couple of things in order to make that work for you. First, you need to actually find inside information. And second, you need to execute trades in a way that aren't going to raise the suspicion of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Okay, so how about that first step, finding the inside information? You know where's a good place to find inside information? Law firms. Like, maybe an Am Law 100 law firm that represents big companies engaging in mergers and acquisitions. Like, maybe Cravath in 1994 when they were representing firms like Johnson & Johnson and IBM and some other big companies. Yeah, that's what Matthew Kluger thought too. Kluger knew that the files at his firm had a lot of valuable information about the deals being done by those clients. And a lawyer, or summer associate, could find out a lot of information that could be turned into big money if that information was used in a timely manner in the stock market. And it would be especially easy for a summer associate who just happened to be working on some of those big deals to acquire that information. But what about that second part, the trading part? Yeah, that was a little bit tougher. The hard part was executing the trades without getting caught. I mean, you can't just walk into a local Schwab brokerage office and start making trades that miraculously mirror major corporate acquisitions. Someone's going to notice, and they're going to turn you in. Kluger needed help. Kluger contacted a friend named Kenneth T. Robinson and asked if Robinson knew anyone who could help them execute the trades. Now, it made sense to approach a guy like Robinson because he used to be a trader himself, even though at the time Kluger approached him, he was focusing on the mortgage business. Well, it turns out Robinson did know a trader who was interested in making some easy cash, a guy by the name of Garrett D. Bauer. So here is how the scheme was going to work. Kluger would look through the client files of the matters that he was assisting on at the Cravath firm. He'd extract confidential information about the deals the firm's clients were about to do. Kluger would then provide the tips to his friend, Robinson, who would act as a middleman and pass the information on to Bauer. So you got Kluger, Robinson, and Bauer. Kluger's getting the information, Robinson's the middleman, and Bauer would make the trades. Kluger would give the information to Robinson. He'd tell him what Bauer should do. Robinson would tell Bauer which stocks to trade. Bauer would then buy those stocks and sell them quickly once the corporate transaction was publicly announced. The profits would then be distributed among all of the three conspirators. The arrangement was a good one. Using Robinson as a buffer meant that there was no contact between the guy who stole the information, Kluger, and the guy who executed the trades, Bauer. And as an added layer of protection, the group used payphones and prepaid disposable cell phones to communicate. The arrangement worked, and it made nice money. But there was one more step that had to be worked out. Sure, you can make a lot of money, but how do you distribute the profits? Divvying up the money made from these trades isn't as easy as one would think. After Bauer made the trades, he'd be receiving tons of money deposited into his brokerage account. He couldn't just withdraw thousands upon thousands of dollars from that account and hand it over to some couple of guys. Those sorts of withdrawals were bound to raise eyebrows. And plus, the recipients didn't want a paper trail of it either. After all, who wants to pay taxes on that kind of money? So they came up with an interesting process for making distributions. After the proceeds of the stock sales were deposited into his account, Bauer would make multiple ATM withdrawals. Then he'd meet Kluger in the gambling capital of New Jersey, Atlantic City. He'd hand the money over to Kluger, and no one would create any kind of record of the transaction, of course. And if anybody got curious about what happened to all the money that Bauer was withdrawing from his account, he'd simply claim that he gambled it away at the casinos. Hey, the scheme worked. It worked so well that as Kluger's career progressed from being a summer associate to a full-time lawyer at Cravath, he broadened his information sources. In the beginning, Kluger was only using the information from the files he was working on. But as time went on, he started to trade on other lawyers' deals. And that really wasn't tough for him to do. Anyone who worked at a law firm at that time was pretty much able to get access to any of the firm's files. So getting information about the deals that were being done by other lawyers in the firm, for Kluger, that was probably kind of easy. Plus, he was smart about it. He didn't want to raise too much suspicion, so he did things like searching his law firm's computer system to find the titles of documents and other information that would give him the type of info he needed to make these trades, but he didn't actually open the files. Of course, one might ask why a law firm of that size with those kinds of clients wouldn't make the names of key files a little bit more difficult to detect. Well, they did, but their process helped Kluger because they didn't change the names of the files to code names until the deal got close. Kluger left Cravath in 1997, and he took a job in both the New York and Palo Alto, California offices of another firm, Skadden Arps. The crew, that trio of traders, made a ton of money while Kluger was at those firms in the 1990s, trading on mergers like Johnson & Johnson's purchase of Neutrogena, IBM's deal with Lotus Development and Tivoli Systems, and more. But by the end of the decade, they put the scheme to rest because they were apparently afraid of getting caught. The group's pause, however, would be a temporary one. After a short stint at the New York office of Fried Frank, and then New Jersey's powerhouse firm of Sills Cumrus, Kluger landed a position in 2005 as a senior corporate associate at the Washington office of Wilson Sonsini, another one of the nation's big firms. And guess what type of work Mr. Kluger did at Wilson Sonsini? That's right, M&A, mergers and acquisitions. What a perfect setup. With that great situation, Kluger decided to get the old band back together. The insider trading trio started up again, and they made a ton of cash. According to the government, they invested over $100 million and made over $32 million in profit. The deals they traded on included transactions involving some of the biggest names in American business: Oracle, Adobe Systems, Hewlett-Packard, Intel, and more. One has to wonder, how could Kluger, Robinson, and Bauer go undetected for almost 2 decades? Well, it's likely that the key to the viability of their plan was the structure of their relationship. Kluger, the lawyer on one end, didn't know Bauer, the trader, on the other end. They actually met once, but that was when the whole scheme began. The two men never communicated about the deals throughout the life of their arrangement because they funneled all communication through Robinson, the middleman. Using Robinson as insulation between the two key actors was critical, and it seems that the Securities and Exchange Commission actually suspected that Bauer was doing something wrong, but they could never tie him to the source of his information. That is, until something changed. After 17 years of success, the group dynamic was altered, and it caused Kluger to make a very big mistake. That change was with a key player in the group, Bauer, the stock trader. Sometime in early 2010, the trader, Gary Bauer, pulled out. Well, with his trader gone, Kluger had a choice. Do I stop trading on the law firm confidential information? Do I count my money and move on with my life? Or do I try to find another way to continue making those lucrative deals? Kluger chose the latter. He decided to keep on trading, and he just didn't replace Bauer. Instead, he'd give the stolen inside information to Robinson, and he just let Robinson make the stock trades directly. Well, when they did that, the feds caught on. With the buffer removed between Kluger and his trader, the authorities were able to identify the source of the inside information. Without telling the crew, the authorities started to move. In March of 2011, the FBI and IRS together raided and searched Robinson's home. When the three men found out about the search, they freaked out. They couldn't understand what caused the feds to search Robinson's home. They had a series of frantic phone calls during which they tried desperately to cover their tracks. But instead of finding a way out of this dark hole, Kluger was only digging himself deeper. And that's because the calls were being recorded. It turns out that one of the three had flipped. When prosecutors listened to the recordings of those calls, they figured Kluger knew he was in the government crosshairs. It was apparent from the panicked and ultimately damning statements he made while he was on those calls. He basically admitted to trying to cover things up. On a recorded call, Kluger explained to one of his crew, quote, "I got rid of my computer. I got rid of my iPhone where I had looked up some stock quotes. Those are gone. I mean, history. Gone. And obviously the phone that you and I talked on, that's gone too." He explained how he disposed of the phone. He said, quote, "I went right up to my apartment. I broke the phone in half. I went to McDonald's. I put it into 2 different garbage cans." Kluger also pleaded with Robinson to get rid of the mobile phone that linked all of them together. He wanted Robinson to destroy any evidence of his phone number. Kluger brainstormed about how he'd explain all the unusual financial activity to the authorities once they inevitably came asking. To explain his large cash withdrawals, he considered claiming that he was using it to hire prostitutes. But it wasn't just his own cash that needed explaining. There was other cash out there, like bundles of money that was being held by Robinson. Kluger worried that his fingerprints were all over those bills, and I don't mean that metaphorically. He actually worried that his physical fingerprints were all over those bills. So to disassociate with that money, he tried to get Robinson to burn it. Robinson, it seems, had a different idea. "What if we launder the money?" he recommended. But the lawyer was probably confused, because it turned out that Robinson didn't mean that they should launder the money in the traditional sense, like engaging in financial money laundering where they try to obscure the source of funds to evade prosecutors. He meant that they should launder it in the actual sense by putting the money in a laundry machine to wash the fingerprints off. It's not clear if they ever tried that tactic. Kluger, it seems, realized that an arrest was imminent. He began to ponder the unfortunate future that lay ahead. If he was caught, he complained, quote, "I couldn't get immunity. I'd have to do time." Kluger left his job at Wilson Sonsini in March 2011, and he was arrested the following month. Kluger apparently saw that proceeding to trial on these charges were fruitless. As a result, he decided to negotiate a plea. He figured that he was engaged in a victimless crime. And he also knew that most people who were found guilty of insider tradings by the courts in New York, well, they got off with relatively light sentences. But Kluger's charges weren't brought by the authorities in New York. They were brought by the authorities in New Jersey. And he soon learned that he was in a very unfavorable jurisdiction. The New Jersey authorities, it seemed, wanted to make a statement about insider trading. Kluger was shocked by the result of the plea negotiations. And any question about which member of the crew was cooperating with the government, that was answered when the sentences were handed out. In June of 2012, the stockbroker Bauer pled guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and he got 9 years in prison. Kluger got a whopping 12 years in prison. According to the United States Attorney's Office, at the time, it was the largest sentence ever handed down in an insider trading case. And the middleman, Kenneth Robinson, he got 27 months in jail. I wonder who flipped. Now, here's what I think is the most incredible part. Kluger appealed his sentence because he believed that it was too harsh. Now, you're probably thinking, how on earth could he possibly think that? Okay, yes, he got over a decade in jail, but it was for orchestrating a massive $32 million insider trading scheme. The quirk, however, is that Kluger didn't know the crew was making that kind of money. That's because the crew wasn't making that kind of money. Only Bauer the trader was making that much money. According to Kluger, when he passed the inside information through Robinson onto Bauer, he instructed the trader to only make a handful of small trades. That way, they'd avoid attracting the attention of the authorities. And as far as Kluger could tell, that's what was happening. Bauer seemed to be following his direction because when the profits were distributed to Kluger, he only received a modest amount, of course by insider trading standards. What Kluger didn't know, however, was that Bauer was actually trading massive blocks of shares and keeping most of the money for himself. In the end, Kluger got 12 years in jail for pocketing about $500,000 in the whole deal. Unfortunately for Mr. Kluger, the court was not persuaded by that argument, and his sentence was affirmed. Kluger was ultimately disbarred in both Washington, D.C. and New York.